please be upstanding for our opening statement, after which we will pause for reflection. Thank you.
We're summoned here to make decisions to which bind our authority for time to come. Let us do so in an atmosphere of dignity, goodwill, respect and calm. May those decisions be just and fair and in the long-term best interests of the people of Dorset who live and work in our beautiful county.
Thank you. Please be seated. Good evening and welcome everyone to our meeting of the full council on the 14th of April 2022. Just to remind members, this meeting is being live streamed and I would ask that you stand, introduce yourselves and speak directly into the microphones. Before we go any further, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our newly elected councillor, Belinda Borden. Agenda item 1 is apologies.
Apologies have been received from Councillor Janet Dover, Councillor Roland Tarr, Councillor Robin Cook, Councillor Stella Jones, Councillor Ryan Holloway, Councillor Jill Taylor, Councillor David Taylor, Councillor Mike Dyer, Councillor Julie Robinson and Councillor David Morgan.
Thank you, Susan. Agenda item 2 is the minutes. Are you all happy for me to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of February 2022? Thank you very much. Agenda item 3 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, please? Thank you very much. Agenda item 4 is Chairman's announcements. Since our last meeting, I have to report on the sad death of Honorary Alderman Tina Roebuck. And I would like to invite Councillor Nick Ireland to pay a tribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This has been written by Brian Ellis, who some of you know as an ex-Dorset County Councillor. I'm just going to read it verbatim. I didn't know Tina, unfortunately. So, Tina joined the Liberal Party in the 1980s and fought her first election in 1982, contesting the Weymouth West seat held at the time by Eric Webb. Tina came in third in this contest. In the Borough Council elections held in May 1984, Tina switched to her home ward of Radipole, a seat which has always been a Conservative stronghold. Tina won the election by a slim majority of just 36 votes. Her agent for that election, Brian Ellis, recalls that he had never before encountered a candidate who worked so hard, knocking on doors and meeting so many people. It was not a surprise to him that she won, but the returning officer on the night was so shocked he almost announced the wrong result. In fact, the result was historic, and that, as the Dorset Echo reported, Tina was the first ever Liberal/Liberal Democrat elected to Weymouth and Portland Borough Council, and the win put the council in a no overall majority situation. Tina successfully defended her Radipole seat in 4 subsequent elections, 88, 92, 96 and 2000. She never again had a slim majority, as her vote soared, and by 2000 she was in receipt of 68.3% of the votes cast, which in a 3-way contest gave her a majority of over 600. Tina achieved these results by carrying out those often trotted out election slogans, but not so often put into practical action. Tina put people first. Tina worked all year round. And above all else, she kept her feet on the ground and in touch with her constituents. On the council, Tina was a voice of reason. Even when she was a lone Liberal councillor, her vote was vital, as her first vote was to stop the infill of the backwater in Weymouth Harbour. This is the area which is now the marina. With the increase in party representation for the Liberal Democrats later in 84 and 86, Tina's integrity won her respect across the council chamber. She, in a nutshell, could be trusted to stand by her word. Tina had a keen interest in environmental and health matters, and her first position on the council was that of Vice Chairman of the Environmental Health and Control Committee, which at that time had a vast remit. When the Borough Council became a balanced council, with all three political parties holding the same number of seats along with 5 independents, Tina played a pivotal role in what was a unique situation, with all groupings holding positions within the administration. Tina took on the role of Chair of Environmental Health and Control Committee, with all parties in agreement to her election. Tina never forgot her ward and was able to campaign on the big issues. Tina was unanimously elected Mayor of the Borough in May 2000 and was thus the Borough's Millennium Mayor, an historic occasion and just reward for Tina's long service to Weymouth and Portland. Tina stood down from the Borough Council in May 2004. She had given it her all and clearly had earned the opportunity to have some time on her own. In preparing this note, it is worth ending with a word spoken to me, Brian Ellis, not me, by a former senior officer of the council when talking about Tina just 3 days ago. He simply said, Tina, I liked her. Well, yes, people liked Tina. Her residents in Radipole proved that time and time again. Officers liked her because they knew where they stood with her. Her colleagues liked her because of her loyalty, understanding and integrity, and she'll be sadly missed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ireland. She does truly sound an exceptional woman, doesn't she? We then move along to agenda item 5, public participation, questions and statements. We do have one question this evening, submitted by Jane Ashdown, who is unable to attend. Jonathan Mayer has been asked to read out her question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a question submitted by Jane Ashdown. The Council has recently hired HIAS Associates to engage in master planning for the proposed Door 13 development included in the current draft local plan. This development of 4,000 houses north of Dorchester is being pursued as a garden community following the Council's successful bid to join the Homes England Garden Communities programme. The government guidance on garden communities draws attention to the need to assess the viability of a garden community and specifically notes that the following action should be taken. Review scheme viability at the plan-making stage to test deliverability and to inform policy development. Consider retesting viability at the master planning stage and when development details become more refined. When will these tests of viability be undertaken, and when will the findings from these viability tests be published and be available for public consideration?
Thank you, Jonathan. We will receive a response to the question from Councillor David Walsh.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Jane Ashton, for the question. Consultants have been commissioned to undertake viability testing for the whole local plan. They will work with HIAS in respect to the north of Dorchester site. The results of the viability work will be made available at the publication stage of plan preparation, when a revised plan is published and there is a further opportunity for people to comment before the plan is submitted to examination. The programme for the local plan is currently being reviewed, and so we do not have a date set for this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. We do also have a statement which was submitted by Giles Watts, and he is here in person to read out a statement. Thank you, Mr. Watts.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Giles Watts, and I'm representing the Dorset Deserves Better campaign. We are a non-political, Dorset-based alliance with the aim of persuading Dorset Council to rethink the draft local plan. We laid out the basis for our request to you in an open letter sent on the 17th of January, and we currently have the support of 41 community-based organisations, and 16 town and parish councils representing over 68,000 Dorset residents. We thank you for the open exchange we have had on this subject by email so far. We are encouraged by many of the things you have said publicly, that you seek a local plan which is right for the people of Dorset and which promotes sustainability rather than chasing national housing targets, and which recognises the ambitions of the climate and ecological emergency strategy. We also welcome your approach to ministers for various exemptions and protection while the new plan is being built. However, the situation is perilous. All existing local plans are now technically out of date, and the presumption in favour of development is starting to be applied, and there is no guarantee that the government will respond quickly or in full to your requests. This has created a situation of great uncertainty and risk, uncertainty in your plans and risk of preemptive and uncontrolled development that will not provide many of the things that Dorset needs, such as affordable and social housing, developments that grow our economy with green jobs, reduction of our carbon emissions, and the restoration and protection of our environment. For these reasons, we urge your council to address the following 3 issues as soon as possible. 1, be transparent about the scope and timetable for the new local plan and make sure that it's robust, even if concessions are not forthcoming from central government. This should include a detailed analysis of last year's consultation and the publishing of all evidence underpinning the local plan. 2, put in place options to prevent a breakdown of the planning process and reduce the risk of preemptive development while the new plan is being developed. 3, start a process of public engagement to involve local organisations in rethinking and rebuilding the local plan. Our Alliance members are keen to support this process and to meet you soon and to discuss how we may work together to support the development of the new local plan. Indeed, an early meeting would do much to allay the uncertainties and to create a more powerful route to a better future for the people of Dorset. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Mr. Watts. I'm sure Councillor Flower will be giving this due consideration. So, agenda item 6 is public participation, petitions and deputations, and there are none. Agenda item 7, announcements and reports from the leader.
Okay. I've got a couple of items I wanted to touch on this evening. I think it would be wrong to not start with the issues that's going on in Ukraine at the moment. It's a crisis of something I've never experienced in all the years that I've been on this planet. I think it's absolutely disgraceful. And I recognise that during the pandemic, excuse me, Dorset Together Network was formed and did a huge amount of good work in the community. And I know that they've stepped up and giving support to Ukrainian refugees coming into Dorset. And that's huge. And I think it's such a fantastic piece of work that's being done by volunteers. There obviously we have a role as a council with Ukrainian refugees, ranging from accommodation checks, education provision for children, a range of payments where sponsorship arrangements exist, health issues, job-seeking opportunities, a whole range of things. And we don't want to get in the way of all the work that's been done in the community, but we are here to contribute and to help. And I think that's an important part of giving that confidence to the community of this country, as well as those coming into this country that need our support in these terrible times. I wanted just to touch on the recent good news around the Southwarks House leasing to the NHS. And it is good news. We've got 20 years of certainty of a tenant in there now, serving the people of Dorchester and the surrounding areas well in the provision from the NHS for their services, as well as us being able to repurpose one of our buildings. It's one of our ambitions to not only to dispose of buildings that we don't require, to repurpose buildings where the opportunity arises so we can create an income. And that income is valuable to us with the pressures we've got on our revenue account. So I think that's a really positive piece of news. I want to touch on the point that Giles Watts made about the local plan. Many of you will be aware that I've been working quite hard in terms of trying to, I've been in dialogue with government around the issues of a current standard methodology that chases housing numbers and it's not strategic, and it's been around a long time, doesn't make it right, does it? So I've challenged government over that. And since the 15th of February, I'm pleased to say I had my first meeting with Michael Gove. I got the opportunity to speak to him for half an hour, and to get half an hour with the Secretary of State in this country, I'm told, is actually quite an achievement. I didn't lose 1 second of that time. And in fact, his opening gamut was, "Hello, Spencer, tell me about the local plan. What are your ambitions? What are the concerns?" So I spent 20 minutes going through all the key issues that I'd already put forward through his department. And he listened intently. And he had in the room with him the Chief Planning Officer of the UK, which is really quite telling. He had his Minister for Housing in the room and a couple of other people. So he took the opportunity to speak to me quite seriously, in my view. So that was a good meeting. We talked about issues around getting an extension. I've asked for us to be given more time to be more strategic in our approach. I asked for an extension of time to do that because it isn't a 5-minute job. There's things we need to do. And of course, during that time, most of us in this room, if not all of us, will recognise the pressures around having to have a 5-year land supply. And if you don't have one, then you can have inappropriate development where you don't want it. So I've asked for changes to that such that we get protection during the period where I have the opportunity to relook at our local plan. And as Brian Heatley asked me at the last meeting, what's changed? And I said what's changed is we listened to the views of the people. 9,000 people put themselves out to respond to the consultation. We've recognised the issues that set in there, which is why we've challenged government over the way in which the local planning process is going about at the moment. Following that, I've had another meeting, which I was very pleased to be involved in. And I've actually met the Chief Planning Officer, which again is something I don't think many people have been able to achieve. That came out of the first meeting I had with Michael Gove, because she was in that meeting with Michael Gove, and she commented about how progressive she thought we were, how recognising we were around the issues about housing, and wanted to know more. So I had half an hour with her speaking to a whole range of issues. And I had Matt Pars with me. Very, very helpful to have Matt with me for that meeting. And we've come away with a few actions, which we'll carry out. And we've got another meeting arranged the early part of June, where we'll flesh out some issues, further issues that they've asked us to look at. And I'm hopeful that beyond that, we might be able to make some more announcements, a bit more around some of the key issues. But what I don't want to do at this point in time is prejudice the outcomes of that sort of negotiation until I'm clear about what can be achieved for Dorset. And I'm very ambitious, as you know, to get the best for Dorset, and I will get the best for Dorset. I will not take no for an answer. And the last item I wanted to touch on, and I think this is another success story, 2 in an evening, my goodness, maybe even 3, who knows. The Dorset Centre of Excellence, the opening of Coombe House. What an achievement we've got there. We made a big decision, we made a bold decision to buy that school, and we're turning it into an excellent facility for the young people of Dorset that need our support. And I'm pleased to say that all the work's been done, we're getting ready, and we're hoping to be able to open fairly soon. And I've said in my bulletin, which will go out at the end of the meeting tonight, as always, that we're expecting an Ofsted inspection at some point. They have to come along and give us a sign, a seal of approval for us to use the facility. They arrived on Wednesday, so we're now eagerly awaiting the outcome of their deliberations. I hope we'll know fairly soon. We'll see what the outcome of that is. But I think it really is a positive thing that we made that bold and ambitious decision to buy the school and make a difference. Keep the young people of Dorset that need our support in the county, not having to go out of county, giving them a better outcome at a more affordable cost. Because the demand for that type of facility for the young people of Dorset will not go away. It'll be there, and we need to do our best for the young people of Dorset, Chairman, and I think that's what we're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Flower. I believe we have a question for you from Councillor Trite.
Got it. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd just like, if I may, to question the leader a little more closely on the subject of Ukraine. It's good to hear the leader's reference to Dorset Council playing its part in the humanitarian relief effort, but since the international crime committed against Ukraine adversely affects and threatens, in fact, it threatens all Dorset residents as well as people throughout the United Kingdom and elsewhere, will the council leader speak for Dorset by unreservedly condemning the unprovoked attack on the Ukraine, declaring our full formal support for Ukrainian freedom and independence, and endorsing the Prime Minister's view that this act of naked aggression does not have the general support of the Russian people? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much, Councillor Trite, for your question. As I said earlier on in my statement around the issues around the Ukraine, it's disgraceful what's going on. And I think we should, I'm sure everybody in this country want to give full support to the Ukrainian nation in the simple naked Russian aggression. It's totally uncalled for. I think it's despicable that what's going on at the moment, and I'm sure all of us in this chamber will agree that we need to give them 100% support while they need it. And hopefully at some point in the not too distant future, they can go back and live in peace in their own country. Thank you, Chairman.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Trite? Thank you. Question, please, from Councillor Kimber.
Thank you, Chair, and Leader of the Council. And thank you for your report on the Ukrainian issue. I've been particularly enlightened by the work that the people of Dorset do in generally, seeing Ukrainian families and the support that country is getting at this particular moment. I just wondered if I can ask whether you've got the information at the moment. I'm not sure. Many Dorset families have offered to take in Ukrainians, and I think all of us in this council will applaud that. And my question is, I'll come straight to the chase. Do we know how many we've been able to take in at this moment? I can say approximately. And is it working? Because obviously the government has had a lot of criticism over this scheme. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Laura Miller, Cabinet Member for Customer and Community Services, and working with the Dorset Together joint response. It changes, it's changing constantly. We know that we've got around 150 offers of homes, and most of them are matched, but it is changing all the time. What I can say is that the council teams that are working out to go and do the home checks and the DBS checks and all of those things are working so hard behind the scenes, and we're already seeing our first guests coming to join us here in Dorset, and there's some great networks springing up. So I'm sure that number will continue to grow. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. And Councillor Andrews, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillor John Andrews, Sherborne East. I'd just like to ask when there will be an opportunity for the members who haven't visited Coombe House, former St Mary's, to go up and have a look, because I'd be very interested to do that. I couldn't do it in the early stages. I know a lot of officers or a lot of members couldn't do it, but it would be really good to go and have a look at that. So could we make that opportunity available?
Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Chairman, for giving me the opportunity to talk about Coombe House and reply to Councillor Andrews. It really is imperative that our priority should be the easy transition of the pupils who are going to Coombe House. I would hate for their induction period to be interrupted by us as councillors visiting. However, I have spoken with directors, and Claire Shields is the Corporate Director for Children's Services, who's with us tonight, and we are making plans to organise an official opening event of which councillors can, of course, join us, which will be held in the summer. I think dates have yet to be fixed in diaries, but that will be happening because it really is important that all councillors get to see the fantastic education that will be offered to our Dorset children at Coombe House School. I hope that's sufficient to answer your question, but I will report to Council on further matters at a later date, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. Okay, if there's no more questions, we move to agenda item 8, questions from councillors. We have one question which has been submitted by Councillor David Gray.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Before I ask the question, I just want to say that the question is asked with respect for the anonymity of officers and what it invokes. I don't want anybody hijacking the question for a purpose that not linked to the question. So my question is, since the press reports about the level of executive pay within Dorset Council and the recent resident survey results suggesting that only 32% of residents in the Dorset Council area think they get value for money from Dorset Council, is it time during this phase of transformation and in our final 2 years of this council to revisit the senior management structure and the remuneration packages to gauge whether they're fit for purpose? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gray, and we will receive a response from Councillor Flower.
Which seems to conflict two main issues that are not, in my opinion, directly connected. You refer to the resident survey, which was carried out in October and December last year. And as Councillor Gray will know, we published information on all of our senior salaries in the budget, full council meeting in February. But this was not reported by the media until the TPA produced its annual article in April. And by the way, I note that you voted for the annual pay policy at the 15th of February meeting. The 22-23 budget was approved by councillors at the full council meeting in February this year, with 61 out of the 69 members present voting in favour, including yourself. The budget was approved following an unprecedented 22 hours of member engagement, briefings, scrutiny and discussion. At no point during these discussions was the issue of cost or structure of the senior management raised by you or any of your group. So I'm surprised that 14 days into the new financial year, this has been raised at full council now. Maybe a bit more optimistic politicking being played at the expense of hard-working officers, which I'm not a fan. Indeed, I see the local Liberal Democrats have taken out a paid advert on Facebook, which produced the local newspaper article of senior salaries, and just now we know the reasons why the council tax is so high in car parking charges. I have to say, I wonder if the Lib Dems were actually taking part in the same budget process as I was. To show such a lack of understanding of our budget and our poor personal judgment is placing such a comment. The reason for the increase in council tax is clear. Additional money for adult social care, 12.5 million. Children's services, 2.7 million. Housing, 750,000. Place services, 6.8 million. Need I remind members that we brought together 6 councils into one 3 years ago, with the aim of being to protect services, and we've done that. It's meant reducing expenditure on senior management, 10 million a year, year on year. We've done that. To reinvest into frontline services to protect the vulnerable in our society, the very youngest and the oldest, and those who just need a helping hand. Clearly we have more to do, so those people understand the services that we provide in order that they can make a better value judgment. But this is something councillors as community leaders can do, not just chuck rocks, in my opinion, at the officers who work under collective political leadership. I often hear people say, what do I get for my council tax? It gives me the opportunity to remind people that council tax is what it is. It's a tax, not a payment for services rendered. However, we deliver 450 different services, which many people take for granted on a daily basis, from waste and recycling, the environment, health teams that ensure we eat out our food safe, training standards to protect us from scams and poor standards, the planning, building control, countryside management, stewardship, the housing team, our revenues and benefits team, adult social care, children's services team, protecting and safeguarding our most vulnerable. Much of this work might only be visible to those in receipt of it. That does not mean we don't need to do it, and it has to be paid for. That said, the structure of the senior management, and indeed of the organisation, is under continuous review by both the Cabinet at senior level and on the whole organisation basis, which is the responsibility of the Chief Executive, who is the head of paid service. Just last week, the post of Corporate Director of HR and OD and the head of Chief Exec's office were deleted, and the post holders made redundant as we continually move resources to where they are most needed, i.e. climate change, for which is a priority now. But our senior leaders, who work incredibly hard in challenging circumstances, lead a very large, diverse organisation with 4,613 colleagues, are delivering against political budgets that we, the full council, set them. Their pay is set by using national benchmarks and agreed by us at full council. Any increase in salary is negotiated nationally and applied locally. Senior leaders received 1.5% increase in pay, no bonuses, no leased cars, no incremental points, 1.5%. When appointing, we were doing so in competition with the National Research for Talent. And I, for one, will always keep this under review to ensure we have the right people in the right pay in order to deliver for Dorset. In summary, we do and continuously look at the structure of the organisation and have made recent changes that have reduced the number of officers in the senior team. But David, the 1.5% increase in pay for our senior leaders, all other staff received 1.75 from last year, is most certainly not the reason the council tax car parking charges have been increased. Perhaps I can remind you that the budget that he voted for and the additional money put into adult social care to meet the needs of the residents at this time, these costs go up because we have more older people living in Dorset. We're hitting nearly 30%. National average is 18.5, I think. Can I remind him of the additional resource we put into children's services? Judge this by the good across the piece we got, across the board that we got, and outstanding for leadership by Ofsted, only quite recently. We're keeping our children safe and providing the right education for our children with special needs, and I mentioned that earlier, by what we're doing at Coombe House and elsewhere. Can I mention the additional resource put into Highways team to invest in our roads and infrastructure, to keep the county and its residents and economy moving? I could go on, but I think everyone gets the picture. This is a large, complex, multi-million-pound business and needs the leadership, both politically and managerially. I believe we have that, and I'm disappointed in any politician who seeks to take aim at officers rather than looking at decisions we rightly make as politicians elected to represent the communities of Dorset Council. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Flower. I believe Councillor Gray would like a supplementary question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Spencer. Not a supplementary question, more a thank you for reminding me that I voted for the budget. I voted for the budget because it was the right thing to do at the time. My question really was pointing to the future rather than the present. So it was a self-examination point. It was in no way political. I don't even think I sent it to my political colleagues. It was me asking my residents, or some residents, were making the link, not me, making the link between the survey results and the Echo story, which was a bit sensationalist, which is why I said I don't want my question hijacked. But it was a call really for self-examination, and you've just explained part of that in the redundancy issue that you had with changing roles. And that's good enough, but I think we need to be better at saying we're changing as a council, and the words value for money, which are easily said, but really hard to deliver. So you've partially answered the question, but it was to look to the next 2 years, not perhaps what we've done in the last 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Did you require an answer to that? Okay, thank you.
I wish to give him an answer. David, I'm going to come back to you, and you'd be surprised if I didn't do that. Because you're right, let's look at the future as well as the present and the past. As an administration, we continually strive to ensure value for money, but we need to make sure that Dorset Council gets its fair share funding from government. This is a point I've made directly to Michael Gove during that meeting I mentioned earlier. I had a few minutes towards the end, and I'd forgotten to say that he's promised me a meeting with the minister responsible for funding in local government, because it's a mess. Local government funding is a mess. Why is it that we get no revenue support grant? We don't. Why do boroughs in London get 24 million a year? We get nothing. It's not good enough. So I'm challenging government about that, because I think the burden of the cost of our services rests too heavily on the local taxpayer, and Nick Ireland's smiling. I don't know what he's smiling about, because I don't think it's anything to smile about, quite frankly. I think we need to take things seriously here. I think we need to recognise that Dorset's getting a poor deal, and it isn't just the current government, it's successive governments of any colour down the years, and it's not good enough. So I'm pushing really hard. I said I'd be an advocate for Dorset, and I will be an advocate for Dorset, and I will continue to do so. And I'm looking to get a better deal, not only looking at the possibility of getting revenue support grant, which I think we thoroughly deserve, but that when the government looks at the formula for the annual settlements, that we get some recognition of the cost of rurality in Dorset. The cost of rurality is huge, and we get no recompense for that whatsoever. So the burden falls on the local taxpayer, and it's not fair. So, Chairman, I'm looking at the future. I'm grateful for David asking that supplementary question. Give me the chance to get it off my chest. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flower. Thank you, Councillor Gray. We now come to agenda item 9, appointment of Harbour Committee Co-Opties. And I will ask Councillor Mark Roberts to introduce the report and propose the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Mark Roberts. I chair the Harbours Committee, which for new members is a cross-party committee of 6 members with 4 independent members. And this recommendation before you is for the approval of the Harbour Committee's nominations for 2 new independent members. We had one who'd reached their full term, their statutory full term, and one who resigned for other interests. And the 2 new independent members were selected after a rigorous interview process involving me, the Vice Chairman Rob Hughes, and independent member Lee Hardy. And we unanimously selected the 2 nominees above. That's Richard Tinsley and Philip Thickness, from a shortlist of 5. As a panel, we were looking for experience and skills that will enhance the Harbours Committee. And Richard Tinsley, with a background in the nuclear industry, and also keeps his transatlantic yacht at Weymouth and has sailed across the Atlantic and in the Fastnet, brings a great deal of safety towards the committee. It's natural for someone who's in that industry. And Philip Thickness, a retired senior Royal Navy and Fleet Air Arm officer, who has been CEO of one of the major worshipful companies in London, brings a great deal of financial expertise and strategy. So I therefore commend this recommendation to Council and propose we vote to approve the nomination of the 2 new members. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. I believe your recommendation is going to be seconded by Councillor Rob Hughes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Councillor Rob Hughes, I would like to ask the Council to vote for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hughes. Okay, this has been proposed by Mark Roberts, seconded by Rob Hughes. I would like to put the recommendation to the vote, please, using your handsets. I've got...
Yes, because 47 and 68 are okay. So yeah, so 20. So we're looking for Gorringe and...
Yeah, just waiting for Councillor Gorringe and Councillor Haynes to vote. If you could do so, please.
Yep.
I think yours is working.
That's done.
Yep.
Still done.
Everybody, the vote's now closed. And the results are 71 in favour. The recommendation is therefore approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. So that recommendation's been carried. Excuse me. Agenda item 10, meeting arrangements on the Health and Wellbeing Board. Councillor Richard Biggs will introduce the report and propose the recommendations. No. No.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've shrunk a bit. Councillor...
Sorry, can I just apologise? The names have been turned round twice, to my knowledge, and I should have just said who's going to present it. Sorry.
Not a problem, Madam Chairman. Not a problem at all. Members, before you tonight is the recommendations from your Audit and Governance Committee, meeting held this last Monday. The recommendations before you will be taken in two lots. This has been okayed by the Chairman, the Vice Chairman and Jonathan Mayer, and is a mirror of what actually happened in the committee. I will be presenting agenda recommendations 1, 2, 3 and 5 with regards to the Health and Wellbeing Board. And my colleague, Councillor Richard Biggs, will be presenting number 4. There is a reason for this, but we won't go into that. So, members, the Audit and Governance Committee thought that the recommendations in 1, 2 and 3 were the right thing to do for this committee, and it was at the request of the chairman of that board. Recommendation number 5 is an add by your Audit and Governance Committee that this is to be reviewed. I think the report is very self-explanatory. Therefore, Madam Chairman, I'm very happy to propose recommendations 1, 2, 3 and 5. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hall, and I'm sorry for the confusion. So, can I ask, please, Councillor Biggs to second the recommendations?
I'm very happy to second that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor O'Leary, did you want to speak?
Sorry, can I just speak on the next bit, which is when it comes to discussing item 4? Sorry.
That's all right. Does anybody have anything to say about recommendations 1, 2, 3 and 5? Councillor Knox.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Rebecca Knox, Councillor Knox. I'm the ward member for Bedminster, but on this occasion I'm speaking as Chairman of the Dorset Health and Wellbeing Board. I would just like to thank the Audit and Governance Committee for sending this proposal to the Council, and I absolutely endorse it to you, I commend it to you. We work on the Health and Wellbeing Board with very, very many outside partners who come from all over the country, and in fact, not only this country, but worldwide. So it really will make a huge difference to the Health and Wellbeing Board to be able to continue that partnership working in a really efficient and slick way at this very important time, particularly with the integrated care system in our midst and about to come online in July. So in advance of your vote, I just wish to recommend this again to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Knox. If we don't have anybody else wishing to speak, I think we'll move to the vote.
The vote is now open. We're just waiting for a few more votes to come in. Councillor Howard-Legg, cast your vote, please. Thank you. Yeah. He's away. Councillor Perry, could you try your voting again, please? Thank you. And Councillor Byron-Quayle, we're just missing your vote as well, please. Belinda Rideout, okay. And Councillor Belinda Rideout as well. Can you just try your handset once more? Thank you. Are you there? Yeah, I think that will be. We'll close the vote. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. The results of the vote are 69 in favour, 2 against, no abstentions. The recommendations are carried.
Thank you, Susan. We now move on to the same agenda item, but recommendation 4. And I will ask Councillor Biggs to propose this motion, section of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is perhaps a slightly more controversial addition, which is why there's some changes, and I'm introducing it. This gives the officers the power, delegated power, in exceptional circumstances to convene any meeting of the council to be in an informal way, the way what we have done previously and has worked, been proven to work, but it is exceptional circumstances. And we did challenge Jonathan Mayer as to give examples of what he means by exceptional circumstances. And we're really talking about extreme weather events. We've recently had 2 extreme weather events. Had we had the storm that we had, 6 weeks ago, whenever it was, this meeting, I'm sure, wouldn't have gone ahead because people wouldn't have been madness for people to travel down from Shaftesbury or whatever to this meeting, which case it would have been postponed. It may have been in 2 weeks' time when any one of us could have had a holiday arranged, for instance, and maybe rather aggrieved at not being able to vote, despite arranging a holiday so it didn't clash with a meeting, an important vote, so that meeting could, under these circumstances, take part at night. I think that's reasonable. We're all used to the technologies. It's all a learning curve for us, wasn't it? But it has worked. It wasn't abused. Officers went with the decisions that were made by informally. So I think it is right to have that in the armoury for exceptional circumstances. But I do appreciate there's perhaps some controversy to it, but it shouldn't be, I don't think. The same rule, I think, the addition to 5, that this will be reviewed after a year. So should it be abused in any way and members not happy, it could be challenged and thrown out. So I think it is totally reasonable, and I would urge you to support it. And look for a seconder, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Biggs. I understand Councillor Cocking will be seconding. Sorry, not Councillor Cocking.
To propose and second this motion, and I agree that we did question Jonathan Mayer quite rigorously on what an exceptional circumstance was. So that's why I'm happy and satisfied that we did actually challenge this motion very rigorously. Thank you, Chair.
So just for clarity, you are seconding the proposal for the recommendation 4? Okay, thank you very much. So we have 3 people wishing to speak. I'll come back to you, sir, in a second. I will first ask Councillor O'Leary.
Thank you, Chairman. I will be voting against this recommendation. I do not see any real reason why officers are required to have this power. I have nothing against the officers, but I still see no reason for this to be put in there, and we should retain power ourselves through chairmanships, etc. So therefore, I'll be voting against this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Leary. And Councillor Parks here would like to say something. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Mike Parks, Ferndown North. I spoke up against this at the Audit and Governance Committee on Monday. And whilst I fully respect the system that we had in place over the pandemic, I can't support this moving forwards. Our residents were very critical, certainly in my ward, about how slow Dorset Council was coming back to face-to-face meetings. And I know, speaking to colleagues across the chamber, there's been similar comments across the county. It's quite correct, we did question Mr. Mayor at the meeting, and the example that was given was exceptional weather circumstances. I don't think in Dorset, certainly in my 49 years on this earth in Dorset, we've ever had such we've ever had such extreme weather conditions that haven't lasted more than a couple of days. And therefore, if we do need to postpone a meeting, we only have to wait 8 days to hold that meeting again. I don't believe and I cannot support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parks. Councillor Lacey-Clark. Thank you, Councillor Lacey-Clark. Councillor Legg.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Robin Legg from Sherborne Rural. Yes, I'm going to return to the theme of exceptional circumstance. I hadn't exactly thought to follow somebody bragging about their youth. There are all sorts of things which you can look at as exceptional circumstances, and I wonder whether, and we've got another issue relating to delegation on the next item on the agenda, I wonder whether that might have been an opportunity, if this had been in place, for there to be a much more rapid consultation with members to get the feel, the sense from members about whether or not to go down a particular route where we were being offered an encouragement by a large sum of money from the government. Maybe that might be an area where we could perhaps use that as an exceptional circumstance to bring members on board and get them more fully engaged. I wonder whether also if you're talking about using exceptional circumstances to create virtual meetings, whether the normal timetable of events is expected to apply. In other words, the giving of notice and the normal notice periods. In some ways, if you're saying this is an exceptional circumstance, perhaps the idea of following a timetable goes out the window. And I just wonder as well whether perhaps some of the senior members of the Cabinet are aware of a small item which appeared in Private Eye recently about the East Riding of Yorkshire Council and its peer review from the Local Government Association, which was critical of the extent to which there are delegations to officers within that authority. And I think that's something we need to be very mindful of in terms of delegation to officers. I think, generally speaking, I'm happy for the Chief Executive to have these powers to order up a virtual meeting and to consult with members. I think that could be helpful. But there are other areas within the scheme of delegation that this authority already has, which I'm distinctly unhappy about. And I think they do need to be reviewed.
Thank you, Councillor Legg. Next up, we have Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Chair. Well, the points have already been made, but I would be unhappy to go back to minded two decisions from officers, so I'm not going to repeat what Councillor Lacey-Clark has said, so I would not be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Kimber.
Councillors Paul Kimber, Portland.
No, really?
The mover and the seconder were quite clear. Sexual circumstances. I understand you said it's going to be reviewed after a year. I'm happy to accept that. And why I've deliberately said Portland, because we have been known to have floods. Now, I don't want to go to bed tonight thinking, my God, we've got to commission a committee meeting when that wave comes over. I want action. I want the guys straight out there with the full processes doing what they have to do. So clearly, it's all about speed and time. So I'll be supporting this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kimber. We have Councillor Canning.
Thank you. Councillor Andy Canning, Dorchester West. Just a question, actually. Is there any procedure in this policy that allows for the decision to be challenged, Mr Mayor's decision in this case to be challenged, or is it a fait accompli under these delegated powers that he would just make the decision and that would be it?
Chairman, I can help with this question. So there isn't a challenge procedure as such, but any exercise of the proposed delegation in exceptional circumstances would be by the Chief Executive in consultation with the chair of the relevant committee. So it would not be an officer decision taken in isolation. It would be a decision of the Chief Executive, very much in consultation, probably at the request of a relevant chair who wished a meeting to go ahead in circumstances where it could not if the meeting had to be held in person.
Thank you, Jonathan. Councillor Took.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor David Took. I'm from Cranbourne and Alderholt Ward. I've heard conversations across the chamber around the idea that we are a council which is councillor-led as opposed to being officer-led. And I think that there has been some disgruntlement with the excellent officers that we have, an excellent chief executive that we have, but decisions need to be made by councillors, not officers. We had an extremely difficult time during the pandemic, and the scheme of delegation worked reasonably well then. But the principle that we're a councillor-led organisation, I think, should be maintained, and I don't think I can be able to support this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Took. Councillor Wolfe.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Peter Wolfe, West Purbeck Ward. My concerns are rather more, well, you might say prosaic or you might say procedural. Councillor Rebecca Knox was concerned that the Health and Wellbeing Board could continue to meet in what were difficult and challenging circumstances with people from across the county, and in some cases, right across the county, nothing to do with Dorset Council. So their home base was not here, and Councillor Knox was concerned that they could continue to meet and continue to debate and disseminate some majorly important information on health and wellbeing issues as required by law, unaffected by the requirement to come into an individual place, because people are from different organisations. We are from the same organisation. So I'm concerned that we are conflating two separate issues. And I have to be honest, I'm very surprised at the Audit and Scrutiny Committee actually conflating the Health and Wellbeing Board, which is a very specific issue, which Councillor Knox requested could actually be taken virtually, and the whole council. And I'm very concerned that we're slipping something in to make a major procedural change for the whole council. This is a change not to be considered lightly. We should consider this very, very carefully. And I'm saying no, because it's much too quick to come up like this. Nobody knew this was coming up. When it went to Audit and Scrutiny, I don't think you knew this was going to happen, because if you did, I think you'd be supporting it, Mr. Hall, and you're not. So I think if we are to consider this, it should go to an overview committee. It should be the subject of very detailed thoughts, so we can put some definitions and thoughts on things like what's an exceptional circumstances, which committees, when, what other issues, who should take the decision, who should it be delegated to, which members should they involve. There's a whole series of things, and I just feel this is far too rushed and far too blanket. So I will be voting against it, but I will personally be in favour of an overview committee picking this up and actually having a long, slow look at it to come up with what I would consider to be a well thought out solution, rather than this. This thing is very rushed and it doesn't feel right, so I'm voting against it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wolfe. We have Councillor Christopher, Councillor Kirby, and then finally Councillor Hall, and we will be taking the vote. Thank you.
Councillor Simon Christopher, Marshfield Vale Ward. I always like to think that I have my feet on the ground, perhaps more than most people. People talk about the storms. People talk about the storms and replacing a face-to-face meeting. Do listen to this seriously over there. There are people in around Burstock who were without electricity for days. There were people in North Dorset who were without electricity for almost a week. I'm a great advocate of face-to-face meetings. People learnt that in September when we were still having virtual cabinet meetings. I think we should address this matter with extreme caution. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Christopher. Councillor Kirby.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Andrew Kirby, Winterbourne North Ward. Councillor Peter Wolfe spoke very eloquently earlier and actually took away a lot of my thunder, so I'll echo. There we go. On the theme of storms, there we go. His sentiments. I'll go slightly further. I'm actually really quite worried that something like the Health and Wellbeing Board has been hijacked by this recommendation. This recommendation should very much be a separate item, and I feel that this has been snuck in, and that's very wrong. And I go again, a proper debate, a proper paper, and in my view, this isn't good practice, and I'd very much like a recorded vote on this.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby. Councillor Hall.
Councillor Matt Hall, Sherborne West, Chairman of Audit and Governance. Members, there is a reason why this proposal before you has been split into two because it represented the differing views within the committee. Personally, there is a considerable difference between what Councillor Knox was asking for the continuous running of a very important committee, and something else which is just, from personally, I couldn't understand what the reasoning behind it was. I agree with Councillor Wharf. If this council wants to do something like that, it needs to go through the proper scrutiny process so that we shouldn't be in here looking at what is the definition of this, what is the definition of that. Therefore, I abstained on this because I didn't think that it was the right thing to do. Your Audit and Governance Committee takes its role extremely importantly in how it acts and how it does its things. But like in all committees, there will be reasons and times where we disagree. That is why this is being reported to you by two different people, because there are two different schools of thought. This is democracy. But I will urge this council, as chairman of Audit and Governance, if we are wanting to do things like this in the future, then it does really need to go through a proper scrutiny process first. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Kirby has requested a recorded vote. We would need 10 members to agree to this. I think we've got there. Okay, thank you. So before we go to the vote, and for the benefit of any of our residents who are a bit confused by our machinations, agenda item 10, meeting arrangements on the Health and Wellbeing Board, recommendation 4, proposed by Richard Biggs, Councillor Richard Biggs, seconded by Councillor Cooking. And we will go to the vote now, please.
The vote is now open. Councillor Ferrari, could you try voting with your clicker pad again, please? Thank you. And Councillor Harrison, if you could just try voting again with your clicker pad, please. Councillor Ferrari, sorry, we're just waiting for your vote to come through. Thank you. The vote's closed. And the results of the vote are 9 in favour, 56 against, 7 abstentions. Therefore, the recommendation is lost.
Sorry, Susan, I think I cut you off on that one. I was too previous here. What Susan was saying was that the recorded vote will be in the minutes of this meeting. Thank you. We now reach agenda item 11, notification of urgent decision. I shall ask Councillor Spencer Flower to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, this is an information item. It's not an item for decision tonight, but it's an important one because actually it's the fourth bit of good news tonight, and we should be very pleased with what we've managed to achieve here. And I do note that the Chairman of the Appropriate Scrutiny Committee was consulted on this matter before the decision was taken, so I'm comforted in the knowledge that good scrutiny exists in this council and has been exercised in this particular case. It is good news. We've had an issue about the Ironese block funding for some time. It all started in 2015, good government change of government legislation with no funding, and left all councils in this country at some level of discomfort over financing the changes in the legislation. We had an historic deficit, which we need to deal with. This is an opportunity. It's £42 million. It makes a huge dent in the historic deficit. We're already dealing with the in-year deficit by our investment in Coombe House, in other facilities in Dorset. So we remove the historic, the in-year deficits. So in, I think, 2 or 3 years, we should be breaking even. But we were still left with a fairly sizable historic deficit that was still growing a little bit, although it's tapering down to nothing in the next 2 or 3 years. And this is a huge contribution, because my worry was that the problem would reverse itself into our reserves and we wouldn't have any. This is making a huge contribution to us protecting our reserves. And as it says in this report, we've already had £20 million set aside for this. And along with a further 15 million over time, we'll deal with this. And the good news is we've had our first instalment. I do believe it was £17 million paid before the end of the previous financial year by government. So we're in the right place. We're going in the right direction. Chairman, I think it is good news. And I think we should be proud of the work that was done by officers. It wasn't easy. We turned down an offer last year because it simply wasn't good enough. I was consulted on it, as were others, and I didn't feel that it was the right deal for Dorset. And I have to commend the officers involved in that negotiation with senior civil servants. We got a much better deal as a result of saying no. And I think we should be pleased that we said no, because we now say yes to a good deal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Flower. This item is for information only. There is no recommendation and no vote. I understand Councillor Rennie would like to speak.
Councillor Molly Rennie, Dorchester East. I'm Vice Chairman of People and Health Scrutiny. I'd like to speak on behalf of the Chairman, who is not here tonight. Obviously, she's ill. And I feel, considering the previous discussion, I should speak. This is exceptional circumstances, and I would hate for anybody to think a councillor made a decision without being accountable. And it was called in the papers a safety valve. I think it was a lifeline for the council. I think it's really important that the Chairman of Scrutiny decided to make that decision and scrutinised it and did a risk assessment of the whole procedure. And of course, the members of scrutiny can ask for it to come back to scrutiny at any time. And also, we could have a report at the next People and Health Scrutiny as to why and the reasons that Jill made that decision. And of course, all members of council are welcome to attend People and Health Scrutiny and take part in the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. I understand Councillor Heatley would like to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Brian Heatley from Rodwell and Wyke in Weymouth. This has been a long-standing, huge and frankly rather baffling problem. And I'm sure this is excellent progress. So don't take what I say as carping about it. My eye is drawn to paragraph 4, where we have got to find the remaining £15.5 million from a combination of future council revenue budgets and through a transfer of funding from other education budgets. I hope that this is not just a matter of taking our hard-pressed council taxpayers' funds and money from schools. I hope there's some third source in there, and I'd like to ask if there is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hickley. Councillor Ireland.
Can I just respond to the point?
Sorry.
Point from the beginning, but I'll take your point away and I'll let all members of the council aware of what the outcome is. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Ireland.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm slightly confused, and maybe lots of the members of the public might be confused. Where does the money actually go? So if we're contributing £20 million, who actually gets that money? Does it actually go into our school's budget? Or is it just essentially the equivalent of paying our credit card bill off? And it maybe goes to government. I don't know. Maybe you could explain.
Councillor Flower.
I think I might let Aidan Dunn answer.
Aidan, could you give us an answer, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Aidan Dunn, I'm Chief Finance Officer for the Council. It's an excellent question because the part of the complexity of the situation is the accounting treatment is going to change in a year or so's time, which is why this presented us with a risk. So essentially, it could be considered as a credit card payment in that sense. So the debt that is accumulating is currently not accounted for by Dorset Council, but in a year's time it would have to be. And so by receiving a contribution from the Department for Education and with our own contribution as well, that debt starts to get eliminated. So over the period of the agreement, the 5-year period of the agreement, by which time that debt will no longer be there. So I think that the credit card analogy is a helpful one.
Thank you, Aidan, for a very clear and concise explanation. We're going now to move to agenda item 12, notice of motion, and I will ask Councillor Claire Sutton to read out and propose her notion of motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Claire Sutton, Rodwell and Wyke Ward in Weymouth. I won't read out the first paragraph as we heard the question and reply at the last full council, but it reminds us that when and if the recently withdrawn Puddletown oil well application comes before our Strategic Planning Committee, it would not have the powers to reject it due to its climate impact if, on balance, it so wished. And this isn't only about fossil fuels. The same would also apply if, for example, a Dorchester airport were proposed. I hope we all realise by now that time is fast running out if we are to prevent the worst ravages of climate change. According to Carbon Action Tracker, even if all the pledges made at COP26 are honoured, a rise in global temperatures of at least 2.7 degrees centigrade is likely. The latest Chatham House risk assessment gives just a 1% chance of achieving 1.5 degrees and only a 5% chance of 2 degrees, which many scientists believe would trigger runaway climate change. Former Chief Scientific Advisor to the government, Professor Sir David King, said last year it was, what we do over the next 3 to 4 years will determine the future of humanity. We are in a very, very desperate situation. But I'm saying, let's look on the bright side. It's not too late. There is still time, but we have to get a move on. We can already see what's coming. Floods, droughts, crop failure, mass migration. While the Ukraine refugee crisis, quite rightly, is at the forefront of our minds, less visible are, according to UNHCR figures, the 5 million refugees who have fled their countries in East Africa due to yet another crop failure. And this is, so to speak, the tip of the iceberg. The World Bank predicts 216 million climate migrants by 2050. Few of us will be around then to offer them a home, but our children and grandchildren will be. As with Ukraine, we need global, national and local leaders, including us, to act now. And the most critical thing identified in the latest IPCC report is that we need to leave fossil fuels in the ground. In this context,
Quiet, please.
My apologies. So in this context, I think the motion is very modest. I drafted it in such a way as to, I hoped, achieve cross-party support. Firstly, Dorset Council already lobbies government strongly and sometimes successfully too, for example, in gaining funding to help us deliver our climate strategy, and also has a strong voice within the LGA. Thanks, for example, to Ray and to Spencer here. Secondly, many councillors who sit on planning committees are frustrated by the parameters set out in the NPPF and want to take back control. Thirdly, in order to implement our climate strategy, we need the freedom to prioritise climate impact over other considerations if our planning committees, on balance, so determine. Cross-party support for this motion would further underscore Dorset Council's commitment to playing its part in protecting current and future Dorset residents and those across the globe. Please let's not play games. Please let's play our part. Hopefully it will make a difference, but at the very least, we'll be able to look our children, grandchildren, or even grandchildren, great-grandchildren in the eye and say, we tried, I tried. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sutton. This motion, which actually you didn't speak, perhaps I'll read it for you, shall I? Dorset Council will lobby national government urgently, strongly, at every opportunity and at all levels to revise the minerals section of the National Planning Policy Framework to enable Dorset and other planning authorities to decline planning permissions on the grounds of climate impact alone if they so wish, and Dorset Council will lobby the Local Government Association to do the same. Thank you. And I understand that motion, which I've just read, will be seconded by Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Rowe, Coal Hill and Wimborne Minster East. I'm happy to second this motion and I wholeheartedly commend it. Immediate action on the climate crisis is critical to stop our world from warming beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius. This window of opportunity is closing. It means that we need to make rapid and deep emissions reductions. Climate change affects every single one of us, and we are all vulnerable to the effects. It isn't a looming crisis happening somewhere else. We see the famines, the migration, the wars, and yesterday the landslides killing over 300 people in South Africa. We see this on our screens. We know it's happening now, but it's not just happening in some far away place. It's happening here. Last year, there were at least 3 instances of extreme weather in Dorset, and some of my residents had to be moved to a hotel for 2 months because of flooding. The rain fell so fast and it was so heavy on that day that it took me over an hour to get out of Coal Hill, a journey that would normally take me 10 minutes. That same year, the Environment Agency raised the flood risk for large swathes of my ward. And interestingly, the Environment Agency cited climate change as the reason for doing so. However, planning permission to build a school and a housing development in a flood zone were allowed. And some councillors on the East Dorset Planning Committee actually said that it was with a heavy heart that they had no choice but to allow the application. I don't think there's anyone in this room who wouldn't want to have more decision-making powers for our own county. Aren't the people living in Dorset closer to what is happening around them than someone living in London? Isn't Dorset Council best placed to act on their behalf? Dorset Council must lead the way for the people of Dorset and ask government to bring the National Planning Policy Framework up to date and in line with the climate crisis by allowing planning authorities to decline planning permissions on the grounds of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. We have Councillor Lacey Clark wishing to speak. Thank you, Councillor Lacey Clark. Councillor O'Leary.
Chairman, I don't think I'll be getting the same applause from the folks up there, but there's nothing new there. I was sent here by the residents of my district, which rates as the third most deprived district in the county, to fight for them. This motion sends a message that we are prepared to crucify the residents of this county on a cross of net zero obsessionism in pursuit of the approval of a small vocal minority who shout loud and do little, who reside on the far left fringes of the political spectrum, while the silent majority struggle with rising prices brought about by an energy policy which for the last 20 to 30 years has failed to put security and cost first. Do members answer to their residents, or do they answer to the latest protest group? I'll be opposing this motion, not because I don't support power being returned back to local government, I do. But I do not believe this message sends the right one to central government. And I don't think our residents, who at the minute are paying a hell of a lot more on the pump, are going to be supporting this either. So therefore, I'll be voting against it.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Leary. We've got, Les. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Les Fry, Dorchester West. A shame that we could not work as one council, as we often hear our leader comment upon. The motion by Councillor Claire Sutton may not be perfect, but with cross-party negotiation it could have been tweaked to make it more acceptable to all our members. What a strong message that would have sent to government had all the members endorsed it agreed the wording of a letter instead of petty party politics coming into play. I will therefore be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fry. Councillor Bryan.
There we are. Oh. I'm getting too old for this. Right. It's always nice to have friends. I find myself in a very difficult position on this. I continually talk to the decision makers in London on issues like this. The motion in front of us tonight does not take into account the process that we must follow, in my opinion, over the coming years. A recent press release shows that Dorset Council is in the top 15% of over 400 local authorities for providing renewable energy regeneration. In addition, Dorset Council was in the top 3% of councils awarded funds for decarbonisation. It may surprise everyone that the cost of fuel for cars, trucks and buses is rising weekly. That, of course, is if you can find any. Our oil and gas supplies come from far afield, often by tankers emitting tremendous gas emissions as they get it here. Russia, who we are at war with, who are at war, apologies. Russia, who are at war with one of the friendly nations, and Saudi and other Arab countries who have questionable human rights records. Everyone assumes that all oil production goes into vehicles. That is far from the truth, as is now been proven. I struggle to think of something that I use within my private life that doesn't need oil in either its production method or its final product. Both Councillor Walsh and I have said that we will continue to lobby in London for the changes to the planning process that gives us more power to reduce the CO2 emissions within Dorset. This council has a track record of delivery. I have a track record of delivery. We know how to get the best for Dorset. Recently, and you'll be surprised I'm bringing this up, we submitted a bus service improvement plan, asking for just over 90 million. We got nothing from the first release of funds. Are we happy with that? Definitely not. Are we going to do something about it? Absolutely yes. With help from the West Dorset MP, Chris Loder, we have secured a meeting with Baroness Vere on the 5th of May, when we will be hoping to get some assurance from her that when we resubmit, we will get a better response and a release of funds. I have asked Matt Piles to join us on that meeting. Again, members working together with officers to the benefits of our residents. This is the way this administration does things, and for that reason, I reluctantly will vote against this motion as presented in its current form.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. Councillor Kimber.
Thank you, Chair. Fellow councillors, Councillor Kimber, Portland. I'm rather saddened to hear our Conservatives over here really wholesale come out against this. Now, that tells me something, that climate change might not be so serious in the agenda. And I believe tonight, and I'm pleased to say, that the proposer and the seconder spelt it out. They spelt it out that we have got to act. Now, we've got to remember our employers, the people out there, are making big, big demands on us, on this area. As Councillor Ray Bryan will remember, that special meeting we had with the local school, and that surprised me. It shocked me because, right to the core, because I suddenly realised, as a council, we may not be talking the same language as the people out there, the schools where we go into. I believe this is an important item on the agenda tonight, and I believe we have got to act, and we've got to act fast. Councillor Claire Sutton did spell it out, the amount of degrees, and I'm sorry I didn't write them all down, but if we don't do anything, we are going to be in trouble. So I urge this council, especially our Conservatives on the left, many I've worked with over the years, to think about the direction they are going. Now, the last point, this could have been quite easily compensated, or councillors getting together, say, hey, Claire, I like the idea of that motion, but I'm not too happy about this, this, and this. And I expect it would have been pushing an open door, if I'm not correct. No. Well, then shame on you. Well, we've got them going tonight. I'm going to finish now, but I urge this council to support. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Kimber. I would just like to say that I was hugely disappointed in the very fact that our parties couldn't work together on such an important issue. and I'm going to leave it there. But I know overtures were made to do exactly that. Right, on to Councillor Legg.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Robin Legg from Sherborne Rural. I hadn't quite expected to be called so soon. Running the risk of saying that I'm foreshadowing the next item on the agenda for debate, I think and I don't really want to speak twice because these issues are all bound up with one another. I think having due and proper regard to climate change, which is one of the phrases used in the next item to be discussed, is not really sufficient. I was quite shocked, really. I have to confess I'd not read the section of the NPPF about minerals and waste until in preparation for this evening's meeting. And what strikes me about it is that there's a very clear policy in the NPPF against peat extraction. It says councils shouldn't grant permissions for peat extraction. And then when you get to other minerals, it says mineral planning authorities should recognise the benefits of onshore oil and gas development, including unconventional hydrocarbons, by which I assume they mean fracking, for the security of energy supplies. It doesn't even say talking about taking oil out to use it for other purposes. It talks about energy supplies and supporting the transition to a low carbon economy and put in place policies to facilitate their exploration and extraction. So there's a very positive emphasis in the NPPF on actually getting the stuff out of the ground. And it's no wonder then that, that local authorities feel that their hands are tied. And if we're, say, to have due and proper regard to climate change, well, that isn't going to cut any ice, is it? It'll go, even if we do have the prospect of that change dangled in front of us by the government, I dare say applicants for the extraction of hydrocarbons are simply going to go to appeal. And unless we're going to change, unless we're going to persuade the government to change that particular paragraph, it's 209A of the NPPF, we're not going to get anywhere at all. We might as well go home, because there will be no change until the government, and we require our local members of parliament to do this. That's got to go. And until it is gone, we don't stand a cat and hell's chance.
Thank you, Councillor Legg. Councillor Took.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Took, David Took from Cranbourne and Alderholt. This seems to be getting overly complicated to me. The motion calls for local authorities to be able to reject planning applications on grounds of climate change if they so wish. So that when we hear a planning application, we can look at it, we can examine it, we can look at the climate implications, and we can say, it doesn't look too bad, but it doesn't help us with climate change. And I'm sure that this council, with one or two notable exceptions, take climate change very seriously. So I think we're making a mountain out of a molehill here. If we pass this motion, it will enable us to lobby government to say, can we reject planning applications because they are poor in terms of climate change? And if we reject it, we're not going to do that. And I think that would be missing a trick. So it's very simple. Let's just pass this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Took. Councillor Orrell.
Thank you, Chair. John Orrell from Melcombe Regis. I'd like to pick up some of the points made in debate and speak in support of the motion. We are told that this is going to hit disadvantaged communities if we don't allow more oil and gas exploration. I would refute that. If we did allow more oil exploration or fracking or anything like that, it doesn't make life any better for my poor residents because they pay at the international prices. So we should throw that one out the window. What would really help my poor residents, and I represent the most deprived area in Weymouth, is having decent insulation. If if our houses over the last 10 years had been insulated properly and retrofitting our existing stock and making really rigorous standards for new building, then we wouldn't be having an energy crisis now, and people would not be facing £1,000 bills because they'd be paying £100 a year for their heating. And that's the one we should take home. And the problem with this whole debate is that we're looking backwards instead of forwards. This isn't a left and right thing. This is looking backwards is to dirty fossil fuels. That should be consigned to the dustbin of history. We should be looking forward to new renewable energies, installations, I've said, and onshore and offshore wind turbines. The cheapest method is wind onshore, and we're missing a trick with marine turbines off Portland. And all the time we're looking at more oil wells, we're not looking forward. So I urge you to vote for this motion. We need to be planning for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Orrell. Councillor Heatley.
Thank you, Chair. Brian Heatley from Robwell and Wyke in Weymouth. Councillor Lacey Clark suggested that your second motion was going to be better. We will see, but I think you will find we have some substantial difficulties with that second motion, which we will come to, and that's why we think our motion is the better one, because it's more likely to unite people in this House. My colleague, Councillor Orrell, has largely answered the points raised by Councillor O'Leary. I greatly admire Councillor O'Leary's support for the people of Littlemore. It is a lesson to us all, but I think that there are simple things that could be done to do with the distribution of income and insulation, as Councillor Orrell suggested, that would do more for that problem. Councillor Bryan, the process is complex. We accept that. I think partly that is why we have picked a motion that goes on one very specific point. That is to say, the fact that the NPPF does not treat fossil fuels in the same way as it does peat, as Councillor Legg pointed out. It's a very simple thing that could be done, a very simple thing that we can ask for, and which gives us a small amount more power in this situation. We greatly admire all you've done here. We know you are constrained by the funds and so on and so forth. We'd love to go much, much faster. Indeed, we think we have to go faster. But I don't think there's a significant difference between us, and we deliberately did something rather narrow. I think I've finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Heatley. If there are no other offerings, I would like to ask Councillor Sutton to, it's her last speak before we vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't realise I got the chance to speak again. What I'd really like to say...
Me, very quickly, please. You did run over by about twice as long the first time.
I think what upset me most about this was that I put an awful lot of effort into writing a motion as gently as I possibly could in the hope that everybody would be able to support it. And obviously, because I come from a small group, as you know, I needed to get 17 supporters. Therefore, I dutifully asked absolutely everybody, please, would you support this motion? I can't say I was completely surprised when not a single Conservative member did, but I really was disappointed. I was really, really disappointed. And the fact that you submitted something which basically tweaks a few words of mine, so you can say, oh, well, yours isn't good enough, ours is better, so we'll get rid of yours and vote for mine. I've got a degree in English. I know how to write, you know. I think it's petty. I think it's really petty rewriting my motion in order that it can have your stamp on it. And I don't usually say things like this, but I'm really unhappy about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sutton. This is a notice of motion, agenda item 12. Excuse me, spoken on this subject, I'm afraid. I'm sorry. Sorry, sir.
Recorded vote.
I'm just explaining for anyone that's listening live streaming exactly where we are in the meeting procedures. So we are on agenda item 12. Councillor Claire Sutton has proposed a motion, notice of motion, which was seconded by Councillor Maria Rowe. It received the 17 councillor support that it required. And we will now go on to have a vote. Excuse me, can we find 10 people that would like to do a recorded vote? Yes, I think we have. Thank you very much. So we will move to the vote, please.
The vote is now open. Oh. Sorry, Councillor Somper, could you try your clicker pad once more? We haven't got your vote come through.
Yeah, that's done.
Thank you very much. The vote's now closed. So the results of the vote are 30 in favour, 41 against, no abstentions. The motion is therefore lost.
Thank you, Claire. We're moving on to agenda item 13, to a further notice of motion, and which I will ask Councillor Spencer Flower to introduce his motion, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. You'll note from the, the agenda, it's a four-part motion, two parts of which do reflect to some extent what you've just voted on, but the first two parts don't. And I think this is a much more rounded motion because they're all interrelated. Now, I think for the benefit of the public, I will read the words that we've got before us this evening. I'm not going to do a preamble. We've heard enough about it. I don't think there's anybody in this chamber who doesn't recognise there's a climate change issue, which is why we declared an emergency back in 2019, why the man 2 steps from me has done so much work with others in bringing about some of the changes that we've seen by this council in setting an example to the people of Dorset around how it deals with that. But however, and by the way, I'll pick up the point that Councillor Les Fry made earlier, attempts were made. They were made. Unfortunately, we didn't get anywhere. So I'm going to read the motion that we've got before us now, and it's 4 parts. Mindful of the current experience of global conflict and uncertainty, Dorset Council urges the government to introduce an energy policy with the principal objective of securing permanent UK energy self-sufficiency from an early date as possible, utilising whatever form of energy generation sources from within the UK are necessary to this end. The Council calls on the government still to meet its declared 2050 net zero carbon target. Spot on. That's the objective. Through a continuous reduction in reliance on fossil fuels. Spot on. That's the objective. And by strategic designs to alter the present pattern of energy demand and consumption. Spot on. There's 3 things we've just touched on here. We've touched on the last one being insulation, because I agree with the principle that you don't need as much energy if you insulate your property better. That's what that means. In the short term, the Council urges the government to introduce flexibilities when considering the need for national energy self-sufficiency, and this will recognise the serious, long-lasting national security implications of the instability that accompanies the present but unavoidable need to import energy, and which is also a principal driver in the cost of living crisis now faced in this country. That's present. We must recognise the present as well as the future, members. And the third part, Dorset Council strongly recommends the government to include in the forthcoming planning white paper a review of the minerals section of the NPPF in order the planning authority may have due regard to, and proper regard to the implication of climate change policy. And I'll come back to that point when I've finished. Fourth, the Council calls on the Local Government Association to reinforce the national case for change, and that it will enable local planning authorities to have a more significant and greater influence in the determination of planning applications relating to the extraction of minerals in their area. And I will say to you, members, decisions made by planning committees are based on policy. If you ain't got a policy, you won't win. You might get the decision by members to refuse, they'll win on appeal. You have to have policy. And what we're trying to do here, and I believe this is a strong point on this, we're trying to influence material, change the policy so we've got material planning considerations that as and when any mineral application came forward, that members in considering the merits of that application can base their decision on policy. Without policy, you will get absolutely nowhere. So, Chairman, I'm going to move the motion as set out in the papers.
Thank you, Councillor Flower. And I call on Councillor Louis O'Leary to second the motion.
Thank you, Chairman. The reason I'll be seconding this motion is due to my support of energy self-reliance by all means available to us for economic, social and national security reasons. I understand this council does support the drive for carbon neutral targets. I am not against renewable energy or against insulation. I support solar power, hydropower, wave power, but I also support coal and oil and gas and what will, along with hydropower, be the power of the future, which is nuclear. We've been too eager now and in the past to write off nuclear power and often think back to what President Eisenhower said about the positives of nuclear energy being atoms for peace. And as a former Sunday school teacher, I transcribed that in the book of Isaiah, of turning swords into plowshares. I think with the world in the current situation it is too dangerous for us to rely on our energy policy to be at the behest of the benevolence of Russian dictators and oligarchs or Arab princes.
Oh, for goodness sake. Excuse me, members. Excuse me, members, we will clear the chamber.
Members, if you could make your way through to the members' room, please.